Welcome to Meatbone Express, the filmmaking podcast. Today on the program is Richard Wolstencroft, independent filmmaker and creator of the Melbourne Underground Film Festival. Welcome to the program, Richard.
Thank you for having me. Yes, it's a pleasure being here.
Now, you created the Melbourne Underground Film Festival.
Yes.
And recently, during the marriage plebiscite survey, you said some comments online, and then it seemed that you were forced to leave that post as director of the festival.
I didn't leave.
You were pushed, or what happened?
No, I mean, I run the festival. I mean, how am I going to be pushed from an event that I run?
I thought that you publicly said that you would leave.
No, I apologised. I publicly apologised for the comments, and I continue to run the Melbourne Underground Film Festival. Okay. So I wasn't pushed. I considered resigning, and I was going to put Frank Housen in charge. But then Frank and I were talking about how we would maybe. How he might run it, and he was going to make it more politically correct, and really that's not what the festival's about. So I decided to make the film festival a radical free speech event, which means anybody can say anything connected to the festival, which includes me. So I can say anything I want. I can be as racist, homophobic, psychopathic as I wish to be, and if you don't like that, please don't enter your film into the Melbourne Underground Film Festival, because this is a radical free speech event now, and people can say whatever the hell they like, because basically I'm tired of political correctness. I'm tired of people being shut down in a kind of neo-McCarthyist, almost Gestapo-like attitude that people have, where they should lose their jobs because they've said something stupid on Facebook. I didn't actually fully agree with the things I said on the same-sex marriage comment last year, so I did apologise for that. I did upset a few friends within the gay community, which is why I apologised, and I think really that's it. I've caused various kinds of controversy over the years, and this is really just another one of the many controversies I've been involved in, but also I've supported hundreds upon hundreds of filmmakers from Melbourne and internationally of all different communities, whether they be the gay and lesbian community, whether they be any community really. So I've been supporting independent cinema for close to 20 years. I'm going to keep doing that. And if people have a problem with free speech, if people have a problem with, if they want to be like social justice warriors and political correctness enforcers, essentially I've got a very clear message for you now. You can get fucked.
Can you explain what happened online? Like, I'm not on Facebook, and even I knew that there seemed to be a kind of pile-on. There was a purging,
sure. Yeah.
And what sort of happened there? It seemed that everyone was sort of jumping on you. However, one friend of mine, Chris Luscri, who is a gay man, found himself sticking up for you because the vitriol. It seemed that it was a sort of purging. So can you explain what happened?
I mean, look, being at the centre of one of these things. I mean, I've caused many controversies. I mean, my previous controversy before this one was actually defending the free speech rights of a gay filmmaker, Bruce LaBruce. So people who actually knew my history knew that I'm not homophobic, and that, even though I have lots of controversial opinions and often say the odd stupid thing on the right-wing direction on this and that, they know that basically I'm a reasonably decent person, and also I'm a free speech radical. So when Bruce LaBruce had his free speech impinged by the Office of Film and Literature Classification, his film was banned from the Melbourne National Film Festival, and he'd been a previous guest of the Melbourne Underground Film Festival. We'd gotten along very well, and we'd spoken about gay and lesbian issues, and we'd often been on the same page about them. He had his own doubts about the way that the gay movement was moving in a direction that, let's just call it mainstream. The way the mainstream was embracing the gay and lesbian movement, he found disturbing, and I found disturbing myself, because I thought when essentially what's called, from a Marxist perspective, the bourgeoisie elite begins to preach your agenda, something's going on to your agenda. And I think, all people whose radical politics is now being preached by CNN and even the CIA, I think you should think about what's going on with your politics when it's now become part of some kind of elite agenda. So we spoke on that issue in depth, actually. And obviously, that was sort of the point I was trying to make with my comment that I made last year. But of course, it wasn't, it didn't fully come across. And it was an unwise comment. Basically, I'd been out the night before, and I'd been drinking, and I'd been partying, and it was like I woke up in the next day in a bad mood, and I wrote this kind of what's called a black pill. A black pill post is it's a word used on the new right, which means I don't know, like, say, for example, if you didn't like Donald Trump and you wake up and you find that Donald Trump is president, right? And you think, the world is going to end. Donald Trump is president. Oh, my God, this is the apocalypse. We're all going to be nuked. It's the end of all human rights. He's the fascist or whatever. So, it was that kind of post, but from the perspective of someone who might have supported the no vote. And the reason I even supported the no vote is just to be a contrarian. I mean, everybody in the arts scene, I mean, literally everybody supported the Yes campaign. And I found that to be a kind of reflection of the hive mind that I don't like. I mean, ever since I was in school, whenever the teacher would say something, I would disagree with the teacher. I've always had a contrarian nature. And so when I saw everybody supporting the Yes campaign, even though really I'm a social libertarian, I used to run a Health Fight Club, we had at least a third of our audience was from the gay and lesbian community. So it was ridiculous, really. But I just wanted to argue it because no one was. You know what I mean? I wanted to see if I could come up with an argument for it. So essentially that's what I was doing. And I guess it was misunderstood. And when the controversy hit, it just became, when you're the center of one of these, I guess it's called public shaming. John Ronson did a very interesting book on it. It was about public shaming, and I should recommend you go read that book and also watch his TED Talk online, because really it lays down the groundwork about the issues surrounding public shaming. But when you're at the center of one of these attacks, it's like you are starring in the Crucible, or you're at the center of a neo-McCarthy. You are Donald Trumbo at the center of a neo-McCarthy's witch hunt, because these people that try and go after your job, your friends, everything, and it's almost like the fucking Gestapo. I mean, they were contacting people who had attended my festival once, who'd come to Ireland. And a friend of mine, Terry McMahon, he got something like 10 or 20 emails from people. He'd been to the festival once, and he just wrote this defense of me. And he said, because he'd been urged to say something. And he said, well, I am going to say something, but it's not going to be what you all fucking like. I mean, sure, Richard, is got a big mouth, and he's quite notorious for it. And, but he's also quite a kind person and very supportive. And when, I came to Australia, and he put me up at his house, and he bought me meals, he made me feel welcome, and we would get drunk together and, talk about politics. And yeah, occasionally he might say something that I might disagree with, but he's a very gregarious and likable fellow, and he supports independent cinema and has done for 20 years. And I support him, even though I detest the thing in this case that he'd said. So I thought that was interesting. And there were a number of people that came to my defense in this way. And, I thought that was nice. Often it was not the people you would expect. It was sometimes people who didn't even necessarily like you might come to your defense. And some people who maybe I'd worked with in the past, and some people who, as far as I know, had never had the slightest problem with me, and who I'd done nothing but support their work through the Melbourne Underground Film Festival. People like Addison, Heath, and Stewart, Simpson. And these people just threw me under the bus ruthlessly. I'd done nothing but support these guys' films, award them. I'd never had so much as a harsh word to either of them, but these two guys, they threw me under the bus, and I was just absolutely shocked, because it's like, okay, look, disagree with what I say, guys, but why throw me to the wolves so ruthlessly? I mean, they know, and they've known for years I say controversial shit, and I said it in front of them, and they didn't have the slightest fucking problem in the past, but now they do all of a sudden. But people like Bill Mazulis, for example, who was a different politics to mine quite radically, I saw him, kind of like defending me, even though he said, I totally disagree with what he said, but, Richard is a more complex fellow than you know, and, things like that really, almost brought a tear to my eyes sometimes, because it was nice to see, there really are some decent people out there who are of an opposite politics or an completely opposite worldview, who might still defend free speech or might still defend the right to have, different opinions, and also even the fact that you might have a wrong opinion every now and then, and even it's okay to have a wrong opinion,
So just to be clear, if there was another director briefly in place, you are very much back, and it's very much your festival as usual.
We were considering putting Frank Housen in charge, but Frank has decided to start his own festival called the Oz International Film Festival, which is going to be a more politically correct version of MUFF. But we decided to keep MUFF as a kind of, rebel festival, pretty much similar to how it's always been. I mean, one thing's important to know about the Melbourne Underground Film Festival is, if you actually look at our catalogues, we don't make these kind of, I don't make these kind of comments within the actual, like you've got 3 catalogues out there in the lounge room I gave you today. I don't make these comments in the liner notes of the catalogue. These are from my personal Facebook page. And I think one thing we need to really make a demarcation is between public and private statements. The statements I was making on my Facebook page were for my private Facebook friends, which I have about 2,500 people, from various forms of politics. Most of them are radical free speech campaigners. But one thing about my page is occasionally I will make posts public. For example, I might be publicising the film festival. I might have a poster for the film festival, or a poster for my own work. So I'll make a couple of posts public. And I've noticed if I do that 2 or 3 times in a row, it makes all my posts public. From that point on. And so then I won't realise I'm posting publicly. And so, but then I'll look and notice, oh shit, everything I've been saying for the past 10 posts has been public. So I'll go back and then make them, what's it called, just to friends only, which is really, my posts are for friends only unless they're there to do with the film festival. Then I make them public. That post I thought was for friends only, but obviously somebody, I think it was public, and someone took a screenshot and then it went viral.
What do you think of Australian film at the moment, and Australian independent film? Where are we at cinematically, and how is the film culture?
I think it's reasonably healthy in the independent scene. I mean, obviously, the mainstream funding bodies are a complete disaster. They've been a complete disaster for years. I mean, look, every now and then, somehow magically, a decent film manages to make its way through the funding apparatus and then be successful. Like, this happens every 2 or 3 years, maybe. You know, you might get a film that's good and also receive government funding, maybe a bit more than that. You know, I mean, obviously there's state funding and federal funding, but these people, they make 100 films. Probably, I don't know the exact amount of films. They at least make 20 or 30 films a year at a federal and a state level. And the majority of these films are absolute rubbish. And the majority of these films are absolutely politically correct, condescending. They're all made by white liberals, and they're all on the topic of like some multicultural bullshit or some, you know, like new sexuality, or it's like, you know, what's the joke? It's about an Aboriginal, lesbian, disabled, I don't know, basketball player in Laos. You know what I mean? There you go. If you want to go and make a film that's going to get all the government funding, there it is. It should have nothing to do with Australia or Australians, really. And it should just be as multicultural and as alien to our culture as possible. And then it will get funding.
So why do they fund films like this? Why do these boxes need to be ticked?
These people hate Australia. They hate our country. They are in charge of what's called the national screen. So they should be nationalist, at least a little. You know what I mean? They don't have to be like, I don't know, Tommy Robinson, right? They don't have to be that nationalist. But they should at least have some level of pride in Australian cinema. But they don't. They hate Australia. They hate Australian culture. They like any film that shames traditional Australia and traditional Australian culture. And, you know, and they just make this kind of condescending, tokenistic crap that's generally not successful. Occasionally they might have a hit. Recently they had Lion, that was a bit of a hit, so that seemed to connect with people. I saw that at the beginning of the film. I thought was quite good, with the young Indian boy lost in India, and then I thought it was dull when it got to Australia, when the white liberals came into it and it started being condescending bullshit. And then the other one was that film where the woman destroys the town, dressmaker, whatever, which I thought was some, you know, this new radical feminism misandry, which is all about hating men, you know, and was absolute nonsense. I mean, basically she ends up doing an ISIS on their hometown because the town was sexist and racist or whatever. So she literally destroys the town like she's a member of ISIS. And this is meant to be celebrated as somehow wonderful. Yes, let's go and destroy small outback towns in the name of feminism. This sounds wonderful. It's nonsense. And that was sort of successful. I don't know why. Because it was like so intellectually insulting.
You look at a country like Greece, who's basically insolvent, has no money. And that they have film movements that are currently being talked about, like the Greek Weird Wave. Their GDP is nothing like Australia, and yet we can't compete with that. So something's going on.
It's corrupt. The people who are getting the funding are doing kickbacks to the people handing it out. And I know because I've spoken to the filmmakers who get the funding. I'm not going to name who it is, but they literally pay bribes back to the people who give them the funding. That's what's happening.
Can you explain that?
Absolutely. Okay, you get a budget of $1 million. I won't say the filmmaker, but I know exactly who I'm talking about. Okay, they're given $1 million. They make the film for $300,000, really. Where did the other 600 go? First of all, the people who work at the funding bodies have a brother or a sister or a cousin, who is in costume design. Not really. They just have a cousin, but they're costume design, and they get a bill for $50,000, and that money goes straight back to the person who gave them the funding. It's corrupt. That's how it works. Basically, it's a money trench, and it's being run by this group of people who are just greedy. I mean, a lot of these people, I'm not going to name them again because I don't believe in doing that, but I've met independent filmmakers who get government funding, whose films always flop, so their films have never made money, but they own houses in Toorak in South Yarra. Big houses worth millions of dollars. How is this even possible? I mean, I've been to them. They show me, this is my house. Really? Like, fuck. You know what I mean? And it's just because it's this system of corruption. Now, it doesn't all have to be that way. As I said, you only got to, I don't know, I mean, if you actually produced, say, put 20% of the actual budget towards making really good cinema, and then the rest you can embezzle and waste on rubbish no one wants to see. But if you just put actually 20% of the actual budget of you would have this incredibly dynamic industry, but they don't. It's this level of greed and it's just, they're unaccountable. That's the thing. And I think that's it. No one will question them on it, and because I do, I am, public enemy number one, because I tell the truth on the topic, which is always why, when, for example, that controversy hit with the same-sex marriage, people have been wanting to bury me with something legitimate for years. And that's why many of them jumped on, this is a chance to get rid of Richard, right? And it maybe nearly did, you know what I mean? But no, I mean, I'm a believer in, what's that saying? Don't let the bastards grind you down. There's a good Latin expression for it, and, when someone wants to fight me, I'll fight back, and sometimes, I mean, that was a reasonable knockdown punch to a certain extent because I said something stupid. I gave them the ammunition. And, for a while there, it was, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but in the end, I realized I lost about 150 friends through that on Facebook or whatever kind of Facebook friend you have or whatever. But I at least got another 200, 250 in support. And I thought, hang on a minute. There's a group of people who are supporting me. And I thought, well, why don't I just declare this festival a radical free speech festival, which I've always been interested in anyway. Which means, anyone, I mean, if a filmmaker says something utterly ridiculous, I'm not going to care. I'm not going to ban their film. If they say something stupid, that's their business. And by the way, if I say something stupid, that's my fault. It's not actually a reflection on the festival. If I say something stupid, I'll apologise for it if enough people think I need to, and that's it. That's what I'll be doing. So, I mean, I guess, there was an element of that, like this desire to bring down this kind of rebel within the industry. And I was told when I first founded MUFF, and obviously someone like Bill Mazzoulis, he knew me back then, I've often played a lot of his work over the years, and, he said, if you did criticise them, you won't get the funding, and I guess I knew that to some extent, but I thought the kind of films I want to make maybe wouldn't get the funding anyway. And I've continued to make independent films. I just finished a new feature called The Second Coming, which was based on the writings of William Butler Yeats. I played Volume 1 to Emil Wilson, and he says one of my best works, and because he's someone who does get government funding, who I think is great, and his films go to Venice. I really like Emil Wilson, so at least occasionally a good filmmaker is actually getting funding and whose work is getting up there on the world stage. So occasionally they do get it right. It's not like they always get it wrong. As I said, 5% of the time maybe they get it right. But I just think we could increase that to 25% or whatever. Okay, if I'm a bit controversial, whatever, but just follow my advice and then say they got the inspiration from somebody else. I don't even want the credit for it. I just want the Australian film industry to be better because actually I'm a believer in the national screen. As a mild nationalist, I think we need to have a strong national screen that reflects Australian culture in all its ugliness sometimes, not just its political correct, like how we would like it to be seen. The Melbourne Underground Film Festival, we do a lot more interesting kind of work. Essentially, I don't know what do we look for when we in our selection process. We don't have the same process as the mainstream Melbourne International, Sydney International Film Festival. Basically, I just look for talent, and I really don't care whether the filmmaker is a woman or a man or from a member of a different ethnic community. If it's good, I'll play it. So that way, funnily enough, MUFF is relatively multicultural, simply because I just look for talent. And by doing that, you know, that to me is not insulting. I don't have any quotas. I won't have a gender quota because I would consider that tokenistic insulting. Like, you know, women are as good filmmakers as men. They do not need extra help. To imply they do is condescending. To imply they do implies weakness on the behalf of women. And I think that's bullshit. So, you know, we just select talent. And surprisingly enough, we have a rather diverse festival. And, you know, we just do that. And subsequently, we have discovered just about every important filmmaker to come out of this country the last 20 years. I mean, we started with James Wan in the first festival, went on to make all the Saw films, and now has become the biggest, the Saw has become the biggest horror franchise in cinema history. Plus he's made all those other, The Conjuring, and he's doing one of those new Marvel films. The guy's like a huge success, like, you know, even bigger than someone like Wes Craven. Now, Patrick Hughes was in our first festival. He went on to do The Expendables recently. We discovered Greg McLean. We discovered the Spearig brothers. We discovered Zach Hilditch. I mean, I mentioned Stewart, Simpson, Addison, Heath. They're relatively successful on the local level. Their films are all out through Monster Pictures. There's a whole number of other interesting filmmakers we've discovered, like Jason Turley. His first feature is really amazing. We played all his early work. Scott Ryan, who Nash Edgerton discovered and has now taken his film idea, it turned into a TV series in America for, like, I think it's Netflix. So, like, this is amazing. All these filmmakers, the first film festival in the world to play their work is the Melbourne Underground Film Festival, not the Melbourne International. And how do we do that on like a literal fraction of their budget, like a thousandth of their budget, 100,000?
Has there been a sort of lack of support for genre films over the years? Is that why that MUFF has been a home for genre and successful genre films?
I think so. Genre's always been considered a dirty word, you know. And Adrian Martin always gave us a hard time because my interpretation of the word underground was more broad than, say, I guess his was. He would consider people like, you know, Kenneth Anger and Jonas Mekas and the traditional definition of underground, which obviously I consider, John Waters say, I consider those underground filmmakers, but I broadened it to consider, to include pretty much anyone who was making low budget, micro budget or micro dot features, whether it be local or international, that had some kind of edge, you know, that had some kind of controversy or you know, genre edge or whatever, and that were a bit just aggressive or in your face, or, you know, also include documentaries about interesting topics and et cetera, et cetera. So I definitely broadened the definition of underground, and I'm not the only one to have done that.
Australia has that great history of genre filmmaking. Do you think we're coming back? Do you think the screen bodies are kind of getting back to genre films?
I attend, you know, like the St Kilda Film Festival opening nights and the opening night of the Melbourne International Film Festival. So I speak to a lot of the mainstream industry figures, including the directors of both festivals and, you know, all the other major people who are on the board and blah, blah, blah. They all come over and have a little chat to me. At least most of them do. And, you know, many of them say, listen, you're right. Everything you say is correct. And I go, why don't you fucking do something about it? You know, okay. But it's like they like me to be right, but they like never to act on it.
Are you disappointed that they don't back you up publicly, and that a lot of the things that you say, people will probably privately agree with you,
exactly,
but they won't say these things publicly and support you? What is that? What is that?
Political correctness. It's like, I mean, look.
But as a personal characteristic,
sure.
What is it about people that stops them backing you up?
Well, I think it's, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's like the.
Are they afraid? Are they afraid?
Absolutely. And I think it comes down to what, I mean, part of me is interested in libertarian politics, libertarian ideas. I think it comes down to also, you know, if you look at people in the private sector who run businesses, when you run a business in the private sector, if it fails, you've got to make change, right? Or else, you know, you can't keep operating on a failed system. But if you're in a government funding system, you can fail like we do every single year. The slate of films made by Screen Australia and Film Victoria and Screen New South Wales fails. And then what do? Oh, We don't have enough money. That's why we're failing. It's not we're doing anything wrong. We just need more money. So give us more money. And when I felt, no, they give them more money, continues to fail. So what they do is the continuing system of failure is allowed to constantly continue due to the fact that they will never face consequences for that failure. And that, I think, is what is the main problem.
Are there some other countries that you could point to that maybe have a better system than Australia?
There are some systems. I mean, look, I'm actually a believer. I'm actually, as I said, I'm a right-wing anti-capitalist, which means I'm a right-wing socialist. So it's not that I disbelieve in government funding. I believe public resources should be spent on Australian cinema. They just need to be spent wisely. I don't even mind if we make, say, I don't know, 30 or 40% of the kind of films we make are politically correct bullshit. You know what I mean? Go ahead, but it doesn't have to be 90% or 95%. You know, if it was 30 or 40% great, and if we made another 34%, 30 to 40% with genre, really exciting, that was actually embracing new talent, we would have the best independent film industry on this planet. I know exactly who the names are of the young up-and-coming talent, old and new. And like, if someone was just to give me $1 million where we could make, I don't know, say 10 $100,000 features, or I don't know, maybe, 20, maybe there's $1 million from, like state government and $1 million from the funding government, we could make 20. I tell you, within 3 years, we would have the most exciting independent film industry in the world. You would have 5 or 6 localized von Triers, 5 or 6 Nicholas Winding Refns, all running about all their work, traveling over the major festivals to Venice and blah, 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 and doing well at Cannes, doing well at Toronto. So I don't know why they don't enable it. They would only need to make 1 or 2 less flops. Like, think about like Danny Deckchair. You just need to make 1 less Danny Deckchair a year, and you could have this tremendous industry. I have no idea. I've never once been called into a meeting to Screen Australia or Film Victoria. Never once. And I've contacted them, and they aren't interested. Maybe I should recontact them, because often I ignore them the way they do me. So maybe I will try have a chat to them, because, this is the way forward. I mean, actually listen to some different ideas. If you fail every year, why not listen to a new perspective?
Deutschland's name, you deserve severe punishment. Bring me the whip. Kneel before me. And prepare to receive the lash.
You both. Ah!
Take the lash, 4078. It's your due, and my duty as a fighter for the right.
Can I ask you about Pearls Before Swine?
Yep.
Making that film and working with Boyd Rice,
Uh-huh.
And that being the genesis, I believe, for the festival that you created.
Boyd Rice, this is an industrial noise musician. He's in a band called Non. He was contemporaries of bands like Throbbing Gristle and Einsters and New Barton. They all know his work and admire his work. Boyd is also somebody who is sometimes identified with radical far-right politics, and would often sometimes dress up in a way that looked kind of a bit fascist, and he would adopt kind of fascist imagery at times. So he was kind of very controversial. He was part of the research collective of artists who were in the research books that V. Vale and Andrea Juno published. And we met through a guy by the name of Adam Parfray from Feral House. Feral House kind of split off a bit from this movement. Essentially, political correctness began to express itself within the whole research circle. And one of the first people they disowned was Boyd. But whereas Feral House didn't, they said, no, we like Boyd Rice. And they continued to work with Boyd, and they did this book called Apocalypse Culture that was very influential, around the same time of this political correctness first appearing in the late 80s. And I got in contact with Boyd through Adam, and Adam passed away recently, so which was very sad. So Vale, Adam Parfray, he was a great man. And you should definitely look into anything published by Feral House. It will broaden your mind. And anyway, we met, and I had this idea for a film, and I'd also been running the Hellfire Club, and I'd had my Hellfire success. The Hellfire Club was hugely successful in Melbourne and Sydney.
Could you just quickly explain what the Hellfire Club is?
The Hellfire Club is a kind of S&M club. I was the first person to do that kind of thing in Australia. There had always been S&M clubs within the gay community, but they were kind of like more underground and indie events. I took it to the mainstream a bit, and I ran it at Dream nightclub and other venues in Melbourne, and at the Black Market nightclub up in Sydney. And I ran it for 10 years, and it was a huge success, and did very well. And obviously it was a very wild and decadent period of my life, and that's what my book Mr. Hellfire will be about, those 10 years of my life. But around that time, the film I made right in the middle of that was called Pearls Before Swine, and it starred Boyd Rice, and it was this big reflection upon, I guess, let's just say, the darker side of humanity. And it really was quite radical exploration of that, I guess. And I mean, it's not a perfect film. I mean, I was quite young at the time. I was only 26, 27 when I made it. So it's not a perfect film, but like it premiered at the Stockholm International Film Festival, where I met Roman Polanski, and he liked the film, and we'd just seen Fight Club. And it's a bit like Fight Club, if I could say what Pearls Before Swine is like. It's like a low-budget version of Fight Club. So I met Polanski there, and then it went to the Busan International Film Festival in South Korea, where I met various other interesting filmmakers, and Boyd Rice came to that. And then it went to Sitges, where I met Jeffrey Wright, another whole bunch of interesting people. And then it went to the Heath Film Festival in Mexico, which is around Lake Chapala. So I went to Mexico. So all these festivals flew me over. I attended them, and then I took it to the Melbourne International Film Festival to play. And they just said, no, not interested, for whatever reason. I said, but did you know that it's played at these other reasonably established? Some of them were at least, the Stockholm International Film Festival is on a level the same as the Melbourne International Film Festival. I thought it's weird that they would play it and you would not, since the film is shot in Melbourne and stars a whole bunch of Melbourne actors. Anyway, I got in contact with Philip Brophy, who is someone I've always admired. I attended a lot of his lectures on cinema and genre and body horror and lots of other very complex issues to do with cinema and horror. And I always really admired his work, and he's one of the first people who got me to explore philosophy, critical theory, and things like this. So he inspired me, because I often didn't know what he was talking about. He inspired me to investigate a lot of these kind of thinkers that he often would reference in his work. So he was definitely an influence. And so I contacted Philip, because he had some friends within the festival, and he said, look, I think they should play it too, so I'll give them a quick call for you. And I said, no, like, they really don't want to play it for whatever reason. I didn't even know. It's the director at the time, Sandras Trolley, apparently didn't watch it, but someone down the trough had, and they said, no, I'm not playing this, probably because it's controversial. And I said, okay. And then I wrote this email saying, it's an outraged email to an internet film zone run by Graham McLaughlin by the name of FilmNet. And I just said, so I think it's shocking that they won't play and support this local film. And then I got about 30 or 40 emails back from other filmmakers saying, yeah, I made a gay and lesbian film, like a lesbian vampire film, or I made like a horror film, or I made like a porn documentary, or I made an underground avant-garde work. And these are all these films were rejected. And I literally said to those 30 or 40 emails, I said, well, guess what? You're all in. I'm going to create my own festival, and you are all accepted. I'm not even going to watch them. I'm just going to play every single film that was rejected, and you're all in. And all these people thought it was wonderful. One of those people was James Wan and Shannon Young. So,
how did that first Melbourne Underground Film Festival turn out?
Very good. It was quite successful from the get-go, and we had some major cinemas supporting us in the beginning, like the Kino, and we had Nova early on, and we had a lot of the major cinemas supporting us. And only as we got more and more controversial did the cinemas have to become more and more independent. But, that's what MUFF is. I mean, I think people should be grateful, even if they disagree with some of the things we've done. I mean, for example, last year we played the Vaxxed documentary, which is about the anti-vaccination movement. Now, I'm not necessarily a supporter of that movement, and this is one thing people should know. Just because I play a film on something doesn't mean I agree with it. I just believe you should have the freedom of speech to talk about it,
What do you think about Robert De Niro and Tribeca originally programming Vaxxed but then pulling it?
That's exactly correct. That's why I wanted to play it. Because someone that big had to pull it. He agreed with it. I know he did, because you can go online and listen to him defend it. His son has autism. Now, look, I don't even want to get into that issue because it's extreme, and if you do get into the issue, people start attacking you. But I will say this, I didn't believe in it at all. I thought it was absolute bullshit. Then I watched the documentary. That's all I'm going to say. And it disturbed the living shit out of me. And you can get it online, and you can go to the thing, a link online, and you pay like $8 and you can watch it. It's called Vaxxed. Just go watch it and make up your own mind. There are questions. We also played a film called The Red Pill, which was about the men's movement, which is, again, controversial from another perspective. And like this local film critic, Luke Buckmaster, he's a typical, I actually know Luke from many years ago. He didn't used to be social justice warrior, but I think he's become like the ultimate social justice warrior film critic to further his film critical career, which of course I think is very cynical. But you know, he was like, "Oh, I saw this film; it's terrible," and then the film is not terrible. Both films are really worth viewing, even if you have the complete opposite view. And there's nothing wrong with seeing the view of your opponents. First of all, to better understand it, to better be able to fight it. If you want to fight something, understand what they're saying, for God's sake. And I mean, it's shocking that on universities, people are being shut down, all these things. You couldn't play these films on university campuses. You'd be shut down. But yet you can have, a Marxist conference. You know what I mean? Like was recently at the Victorian College of the Arts. There was a huge Marxist conference. It was advertised everywhere. Now, Marxism is almost directly connected to the deaths of over 100 million people through communism in the 20th century. They make the Nazis look like school children. You know what I mean? Well, the Nazis got, 6 million? You know what I mean? Okay, let's even include everyone who died in World War II. From the Nazi perspective, I don't know, it must be like 50 million maybe. Still, the communists way outweigh them. There's been estimates of over 160 million people killed by communists in the 20th century. So, people should question this. There is danger in the left and the far left, just as there's danger in the right and the far right. So I think everyone should be aware of these dangers, and everyone should try and keep, I have no problem with being interested in far left ideas or far right ideas. I have some interest in these things myself, but we should all avoid the horrors on either end, or else we're headed towards fucking disaster.
What is your advice to young filmmakers that are not going to be given funding? What is your advice to them if they have it in their heart that they want to make movies?
Well, I mean, I've made 7 or 8 features since I made Bloodlust, and they've always been independently funded. Just my advice is just go do it. Don't accept no for an answer. And I mean, if I live to be, 75, I'll have 20 by the time I've finished. So, I mean, I'll have a body of work comparable to a filmmaker like Rainer Werner Fassbinder, who's one of my idols. So just get out there and fucking do it. Don't take no for an answer. Don't let anybody say no to you, whatever you do. You can always make a film, whether it be a low budget, a bigger budget. I've worked with different budgets. I've never had a large budget film. And believe me, the first time I do, you'll know it because the whole world will know it.
What do you think is coming next culturally? Is political correctness going to get worse, or do you think that there's going to be a backlash?
I don't know. I think the backlash is well underway. I mean, you just see the popularity of someone like Jordan Peterson, who's destroying political correctness. And he's beginning to occupy what Gramsci called the cultural discourse space. I think there's a reaction against it. I think there's a definite right swing back. I mean, how far that goes, you don't know. And people should be wary, I think, because that swing can be really intense. And but look, I don't know. I'm hoping there'll be a swing back to the right, but it will be mild, and then hopefully we'll balance things out. Essentially, I'm more of a bit of a radical centrist, and also I have an interest in what's called dialectics. I have an interest in far left ideas, and I have an interest in far right ideas, and they meet up a bit. Not at the radical ends; they meet up more in the middle. I have an interest in some aspects of socialism, and I have some interest in some aspects of nationalism, limiting immigration and things like this. So I think both can have value and such. So I think we need to show moderation, particularly when things seem to be going off the rails. Our whole society seems to be going off the rails, and there's great. You only need to look at the 20th century to see what the dangers are on both the left and the right. I mean, there's a strong chance we're headed towards these kind of horrors, whether it be left-wing horrors or right-wing horrors. And I think all of us need to do everything we can to avoid that. I mean, don't we? I mean, as Jordan Peterson might say, it's no fucking picnic.
Who are some of the people that have influenced you on your path to create a film festival and be an independent filmmaker? Who are some of the people that really had a big fundamental influence on you early on and formed you as the Richard Wolstencroft we know?
Sure. I've been very fortunate over the years to have a number of mentors, and I've always been somebody who realizes the importance of mentors in life. There's a number of them. One of the first ones was my media teacher at Ivanhoe Grammar School. I had media studies in year 9 and 10, and I had this amazing media studies teacher by the name of Simon LaPlastria, and he used to just do really weird things. Like, this was a very oppressive kind of like boys' school, and he would just come in and you would just say, okay, everyone lie on the ground, and then he would play Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon, like the whole album, and everyone just be lying there and dim the lights. And he wasn't dodgy in any way. He wasn't running around doing anything. He was just into art. Or another time he'd come on and he'd play a Ken Loach film, And then he began to just play interesting films. Generally, I was 16 mil. And the one that changed my life was If by Lindsay Anderson, which was about a group of boys at a boys' school, a repressive boys' school, very much like the one I was attending, who decide to become revolutionaries. And exactly what kind of revolutionaries they are. They seem, maybe they're right-wing revolutionaries, maybe they're left-wing revolutionaries. But at the end of the film, they shoot up the entire school with weapons. There's no way you could play that to a film at school now, with all these school shootings. But that film, it made me realize, because I was always into kind of like violence and violent cinema and action cinema and cinema that involves sexuality and stuff. As a teenager, because there was a whole video revolution. I grew up during the whole video nasty revolution, so I'd seen lots of horror films. But then when I saw a film that was like an art film that embraced kind of like violence and really kind of controversial intellectual ideas, that was when I thought, that's what I want to do with my life.